In January 1948, Georgia O'Keeffe, celebrated artist and wife of one of the godfathers of photography, Alfred Stieglitz, walked into Irving Penn's studio in New York. She had come to be photographed as part of a series that Penn was creating for Vogue magazine. On seeing the resultant portraits, O'Keeffe was so displeased with the results that she actually requested the prints to be destroyed. What was it about being photographed in this now iconic setting that both so enthralled and disquieted the celebrities that Irving Penn turned his lens towards? Discover the story about how these iconic portraits came into being and the way that they enabled Irving Penn to become one of the greatest photographers of the modern era. How's it? I'm Alex, and thank you so much for joining me here today on The Photographic Eye. Throughout his career, Irving Penn was responsible for many iconic photographs. For almost 70 years, he turned his hand to many subjects: fashion photography, still life, and of course, portraiture. Penn created many portraits throughout his career, and he is rightly famous for them. From his ethnographic and classically straight portrait photography, through to my favourite body of his work, the corner and carpet portraits. These were the first photographs of Irving Penn that I was introduced to, and wrapped up in their story is a lesson to us all about how we can take our own insecurities and rather than let them hold us back, we can create something magical in our photography. These iconic portraits of celebrities squeezed into these unforgiving and claustrophobic spaces, juxtaposed against a bare and quite clearly temporary set, or floating in space anchored only down by Penn's carpet, his constant photographic companion, would become a badge of success for many sitters, and for others like O'Keeffe, an uncomfortable revelation. But how did this bare and almost brutal style come into being in the first place? In 1946, Irving Penn was working at Vogue magazine and was asked by the art director Alexander Lieberman to create a series of portraits celebrating New York's cultural scene, which had recently been enriched by the artists and intellectuals who'd fled Europe during the Second World War. Previously, Penn's experience had been creating portraits on site where people lived and worked, but he found it uncomfortable to be working when so many variables were outside of his control. Lieberman was extremely supportive of Penn's career, which had begun under the mentorship of Alexei Brodovich, who would also go on to mentor Richard Avedon, who was a contemporary of Penn's. Lieberman was happy to give Penn a dedicated studio where Penn could work without distraction, build sets to his own specifications, and arrange sittings and prepare background information on his sitters prior to the shoots. Aside from the distinctive setting, something else that sets these portraits apart is the lighting. Penn said that he wanted only one light source, just like the sun, so he created a bank of lights in the studio to mimic daylight. He was dispensing with the complicated setups of separation, hair, and kicker lights that were a hallmark of celebrity portraits of the 1930s pre-war era. At this stage in his career, Penn was a relatively new photographer. He was quite inexperienced and slightly uncomfortable about photographing people. Having a system and a consistent look and feel to the photographs would help him create an area that he felt comfortable working in. It would be easy for him to create a brand new space that felt modern, as he wasn't married to the panelled walls and French chairs that were characteristic of someone like Cecil Beaton at the time. But how would he be able to create this distinctive look and feel to his portraits? Originally, Irving Penn had been an art director and before the war had been working at Saks on Fifth Avenue, the famous department store in New York City. Every day he'd walk past the mannequins in the window displays, and this is where the idea had been planted for using this window display like a stage-type setting. Penn had experimented with this idea for a spread in Vogue in 1947, and he'd created the look of these window displays, but instead of having the walls go straight back, he'd angled them slightly in to give a more pleasing feel within the magazine format. This uniform look and feel with the lighting was the embryo of the corner portrait look. Contributing to the whole vibe of the photographs was the fact that, in addition to the walls stopping the eye from wandering out of the photograph, they helped to amplify the nature of the sitter, almost like a reflector behind a flashbulb, as Irving Penn put it. The result of this was to create an intense space that was both visually uncomfortable and disquieting, even without anybody inside it. This unusual setting totally threw the celebrities who came into his studio. Almost like naughty children, they were forced to stand in a corner, and it helped to put Penn on an even footing with them. And throughout the session, they would then be encouraged to improvise however they wished. The hope was that as they tried to accommodate their bodies and their egos in this space, that they would drop their guard and reveal their true nature. If you're enjoying this look at Irving Penn, please give the video a like, as it helps YouTube to know that you're enjoying it and to then help other people like yourself discover these fantastic images. At the end of the episode, I'm going to put a playlist up on the screen to other videos in this series showcasing more wonderful portrait photographers whom I just know you're going to be inspired by. In addition to this uncomfortable and unusual looking set, Penn's use of a wide-angle lens gives a foreshortening effect to the photographs, which lends them a bizarre quality. In his portrait of Joe Louis, the famous boxer, the shoulders and arms of this champion are rendered smaller than his feet, throwing off our expectations of what a study of a boxer should focus on. You can also see this at work in his portrait of Salvador Dali, the way that Dali's feet seem to wobble and melt almost, so befitting the look of a surrealist. Between the corner portraits and the carpet portraits will work together in harmony. Penn was beginning to flex his muscles as a photographer and growing confidence behind the camera. But what happens when you have an ego the size of Marlene Dietrich walk into your studio? In his carefully controlled studio situations, Penn had grown increasingly comfortable with creating his portraits. He was enjoying the verbal joust with his sitters and the variety, the constant evolving challenge of meeting another different and illustrious person. He'd come to feel that both himself and the celebrities were in the same boat, and he was no longer feeling overawed by these larger-than-life personalities. So when Marlene Dietrich came to be photographed, she walked in and immediately told Penn just where to put the lights, how to compose the photograph, and how she was going to pose. "Now look," Penn said to her, "in this experience, you will be Dietrich and I will be the photographer." So apparently she wasn't really pleased with this response, but she went with it, and of course we ended up with this wonderful photograph. Much like Edward Steichen before him, when Steichen had photographed Garbo in a way that went against the grain, Penn was now totally in control of his sitters. If you've not experienced Edward Steichen's photography before, I'll link to an episode where you can find out more about him at the end of this video. There's a hidden element in the corner portraits that isn't often remarked upon, and that is the unassuming carpet that supports everything. Almost like a tattered and beloved teddy bear of a nervous child, this carpet went everywhere with Penn during this period and appears in most of his photographs at Vogue. Much like the flats which helped to anchor the sitter and the photograph, this strip of carpet provided a focal point for the portraits that were created without the flats. It marks itself as a common thread between them, which creates a visual link and as a hallmark of a Penn image. These portraits, with their consistency and pared down sets, along with Irving Penn's insistence on highlighting the artificiality of the studio portrait with its cables and equipment on view, created a recognizable style and made Penn's name as a photographer. They may have caused some displeasure and unease amongst certain sitters, but their intention is to grab the viewer's gaze, and in this task they performed brilliantly. So much so that some 70 years after they were created, they still influence photographers and video directors today looking to create a disquiet in their images. Irving Penn would go on to have an exemplary career in photography, and his name is quite rightly up there with the legendary photographers. Part of the joy of photography is, of course, discovering work that you may not have seen before. With so many amazing photographers out there, it's kind of hard to know where to start. To help you, I've created a playlist showcasing some of my favorite portrait photographers, which I've put up on screen here for you right now. Click on the box right there and you'll be taken to the next video in the series. Thanks ever so much for joining me here today, and I really look forward to seeing you again soon.